Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Education on Fire. It's great to be back with you live. Sorry I wasn't with you last week. We had a family engagement, a birthday party, which was fantastic. So I had a lovely time doing that. So missed that week. So I thought I'd come back this week and we'll cover a little bit about the two Ger Graus episodes which have come out in the last couple of weeks, and also talk about the £4 billion fund for Send. I'm not going to go into details about the actual Send policy and the document itself. There are a gazillion things out there online in the last couple of days, but just want to mention a couple of things which I think, certainly based on the Ger Graus Gets Gritty series, would be useful just in terms of what we think that might be, and how we could reframe it in a slightly different way. So as always, if you are watching live, please do like, subscribe, say hello in the comments. It'd be fantastic to say that and see where you are, especially if you're on YouTube. If you're in LinkedIn, you can leave a comment. I will get back to you again after the show. Really appreciate you being here. Please do share this with people that you think it would be helpful with, your colleagues, your friends, people that are working within education. It's always great to get everyone's views. And thank you to everyone who's been engaging with all of the things that are happening. The short on YouTube of some of Ger's comments that he's made through these little last 6 episodes that we've released, a few thousand of you liking some of these things. I really do appreciate that. It's always great to have these conversations through LinkedIn as well. It's really great that there are so many engaged people interested in what we're actually doing as part of this series, but also being able to talk in a more general sense as well. So remember, the thing that we'd love you to do is Education on Fire as a hashtag. Education on Fire as a hashtag, whether it's your normal social or if you're commenting on some of the things that I've done as well. It's always great to be able to sort of link all the things together, be able to join the dots, and actually see what people are doing related to actually having watched some of the things or listened to Education on Fire as they go through. So remember, you can always listen to the actual shows themselves on any podcast player, wherever you're doing that, and you can follow, subscribe, review, all those things as well. And of course, here on YouTube, we've got videos of all of the episodes, as well as obviously being here live. So we've got a few people coming up as guests over the next few weeks. We're going to have a couple of people talking about music in the arts. We've got people coming on talking about leadership. So do keep make sure you're sort of subscribed to the channel. If you're not on my email list, that's another great place to be able to go and find out more of what's going on the homepage of Education on Fire. You can sign up there and keep up to date with everything that's going on. So yeah, really appreciate all those people who are engaging in all of those different ways. So let's talk about last week's episode of the Ger Graus Gets Gritty season. It was all about the 5th chapter of his book, The Role That We Play. So some really interesting things from here. Some of the key takeaways, as always, is the fact that we are, of course, role models, whether we realize it or not, how we come across, what it is that we're actually doing in our kind of subconscious as well as our conscious, obviously comes across as really sort of important and often happens as sort of copied behavior. And I think I mentioned it on the show. It's that kind of sense that what we want to be able to do is to not overthink these things, because we want to be our authentic selves and how we interact in a natural way is really important. But then within that, having the scaffolding almost of knowing how we come across and how we present ourselves in those moments too. So it's sort of two sides of the same coin. So I think being aware of those things is really important. And so much of that is often about how you make people feel or how they felt by being around you, whether it's your tone of voice, the types of things you're asking, and knowing each child. So a really important thing there, especially in terms of leading by the example, what you do. One of the things that has been popular in Ger's is talking about the fact that we all make mistakes, actually sharing, I don't know what the answer is, or I'm not sure about this, or it took me a long time to be able to figure this out. Having those sorts of conversations are incredibly important. Now, the industrial model of education, rather, well, we know it's outdated. We know it's still there. And we're going to talk about this later on in terms of the Send reforms and the things that are coming out. However, what's the reality of these things is, of course, the fact that they're there and they were put in place for something which happened a long time ago. They haven't really changed very much, but there's also this sense of, do people really want them to change? Is there a certain amount of control which goes through as well? And so it doesn't really serve us anymore, but also how much preparation do we really want for modern life? Those of us in education, those of us who've got child first focus of what we're trying to do, of course it should be different. But we know there are lots of things in place. It's not just about the educational side, there's the political side, there's the financial side, and everything we've talked about on this podcast season so far talks about having obviously the child at the center of what we're doing, but more importantly, how we can have that as a community, the people within the school community, outside of the school itself in terms of parents and people who are responsible for children, but also businesses, things that are within the community where children can visit as well and actually learn within that construct as well. And I think all those things are really, really key and really, really important for people that are doing it. And that's kind of where this idea of the sort of the community-owned idea, the more than a schools in terms of what we are, that really it's the sense of being a hub in terms of people coming into school, but also what the school can do for people coming out of that as well, and why that's so important to be able to do that. We also touched there on that careers education. I think all of us can hear about that. My example of that was that when I had my careers conversation at my secondary school, I said I was really, really interested in music, and it was that kind of, well, you can become a teacher or you can go into the armed forces and play in one of the bands. At no point did they say, why don't you apply for music college or move to the capital city and start interacting with people and learn that way. Luckily for me, I had people around me that could support me in that. And I went to music college, moved to the capital, went to London, and my career started from there. But I think no matter what your sort of interest in, whatever your speciality is and the thing that really lights your fire, understanding that there's more out there than maybe the box ticking, which was certainly the situation that I had when you kind of put down all the things you were interested in and what that eventually sort of spit out at the other end, telling you that this is the sort of thing that you would be able to do. So that's a really sort of key, interesting thing for that episode. And of course, if you haven't been to the website, all these things are there. You've got the chapters you can put through. You've got links to Ger's book, ways you can support the show, and also a transcript as well. So if you enjoy reading through these things, feel free to do that as well. Okay, so why don't we have a look at the next episode too? In case you haven't been to Education on Fire, you can see it's very easy to find all the things that you need. And I really love the fact that this week's was all about more than a school, but also actually measuring what is it that we want to do? How do we actually want to come about, show up and explore what it is that we want to do? And the whole thing started when Ger was talking about this idea of being more than a club, inspired by obviously Barcelona's famous motto. And I think that's where you kind of start to understand that it's not just about what the academics are. It's not just about all the individual people. It's about how we interact, how we all come together and want to focus on how we go and how we turn up, how we are literally being deliberate about being more than a school and the challenge that makes. And it's all about values. It's about being resourced. It's about not stopping at thinking, I can't do anything because we're waiting for a government permission or things to change, but actually what is it that we can do? Even if it's a small thing, actually be the people we want to be able to see going forward. Of course, the idea of the whole child I've mentioned already, but actually taking it as individuals and not the average, not just doing it for the percentage of people, but actually everyone across the board, whatever they happen to do. And I sort of love that idea of, which has happened actually in many episodes, talking about that if a child is hungry or if they're cold, if they're unsettled, whatever it happens to be, learning comes after the kindness and the setting up and giving them what they need in order to then make education and learning important and an essential foundation for that going through. And he took us through all of his 10 A's as identified from the Children's University, and the things that are important, attainment, attendance, attitudes, adventure, agency, and advocacy, all those things which just come above and beyond, which is not just yes, we need to get this grade. And I think that's really important. And in terms of sort of how the inspections work, and we've mentioned already before about how that opportunity to make a difference was there, and it doesn't seem to have been that different as it's come back, but that's a conversation for another time. I really enjoyed the idea of the measuring progress rather than just performance. One of the things I talk about all the time when I'm teaching, and from a musician's point of view, is the whole journey of that, how that arc is. It's new. What are we trying to achieve this week? It might just be showing up to actually do the practice. It might actually be that what we want to do It's actually understanding that it's going to take us a few weeks to achieve this next goal, but then we know that after that we've achieved the new technical skills that we need, and then we can actually put that through, and we will progress faster beyond that, because it all starts to sort of form into place. All those, everything sort of gels together, all the jigsaw pieces come together and make that work. And a good example of that is that if you're learning a piece of music, certainly as a drum teacher, if there's say a bass drum technique that's in there, you have to practice slowly and some of the movements in order to make that work. But that you know that once you've actually done that, the playing the music itself, the listening to the music, how it then fits with the maybe the bass line or the music around it, it suddenly makes more sense, because you realize that you've got the ability to be able to do that, and it actually fits much easier with what it is that you've been learning. So yeah, really, really important that you're sort of measuring what you're doing and how you're getting there, just not the end result, because these things take a long time to sort of come together. And that really is where the idea of professional trust comes in. We really want people to be able to feel that we know as educators what we're doing. More than happy to talk about it, more than happy to understand it, but how those things happen. And when Ger was talking about sort of the action zone there, and talking about how head teachers were coming and sort of generally trusted each other, and they had their 29 schools, I think that's different than being a multi-academy trust and being told what's to do. I think this was more the fact that they were coming together as an action zone, and they were individuals actually then being able to collaborate and sharing their experience and solving the problems. And I think there's a real difference in how that comes about. And I think one of the things that Ger really sort of emphasised was the sense that whatever the problems were, whatever they were trying to actually achieve or navigate, if there were issues, there was someone within those schools that had been there, done it, could help out, point you in the right direction. And that collective cohesion really makes for something which is really positive that you can build on over time. And I think one of the things that Ger pointed out was the sense that it takes time to do that. It takes time to bring those things in. But I think actually these schools are still connected in a way all these years later. And I think this was back in the end of the 90s this started, and the action zones lasted for a few years, and then I think they've disbanded, but as a group of schools they still actually work together, which is really, really amazing. So finally, as part of this, the idea of engaging with parents and teachers together, the fact that we're trying to do everything that we need cohesively, not having this sense of kind of parents against teachers or teachers against parents or schools, the fact that once we're doing all these things all together, that's when real magic happens. The way to be able to bring out what we owe. And I think one of the things that Ger mentioned was that idea of that sort of written thank you. You know, you think in COVID you really understood what teachers were doing and how they managed to change everything that was going on. Actually, just at those points, you know, when you know something amazing has happened within a school, or there's been a kind word, or you know the teacher's had a bit of a tough time, do you make the effort just to say thank you? Do you write a little note? That sense of, do you understand that I understand this has been a bit of a week, whatever that happens to be, or, you know, you've gone above and beyond to make this experience happen, and I know that my child has really gained from that, and just thank you. And I think it's amazing, and I always know it makes such a big difference to you when you hear these things, that people really understand what you're trying to do, and to be sort of seen and heard in those things is really important. And I think for me as well as a teacher, I have a parents' evening coming up, and I want to do the same thing going back the other way, because there's one particular student of mine who's doing brilliantly, but doing brilliantly in that slight edge kind of way that I've spoken about before in terms of the book there by Jeff Olson. That sense of being supported at home to do some practice, to be interested in what it is that they're learning, to set up a practice routine, to actually write in the practice notebooks so that I know what's going on at home, and actually having that community feel and that cohesion. And the results, my pupils doing brilliantly. They're really excited. They can see the path that they're going on, and they're actually progressing at a speed that they feel like, wow, I can really see where this is taking me. All those dots joined up in themselves, small little things, but the reality is a really big step forward. And so, yeah, I want to pay that forward, pay that back as well, and actually make sure that they understand that I'm really grateful that we're working together to support what they're doing. So yeah, works both ways: parent to teacher, teacher to parent, and vice versa as we go back. So if you haven't actually seen Ger's book or bought Ger's book or want to know more about it, this is the place to go. If you go to gergraus.com, obviously his website and all the things that he does in terms of his keynote lectures and all those things, but gergraus.com/the book takes you directly to that page, and then from there you can get hold of it. It's obviously an incredible read, but I think if you've listened to the podcast series so far, you understand this whole thing about the storytelling. He's brilliant at being able to paint these pictures and make the examples, the for example, which is one of the things he says we should do very much when we're teaching and explaining something, so that it makes it relevant. There's an example of how this abstract idea of what you're explaining becomes a reality. And I love the way that's really worked and come about. So yeah, if you haven't got the book already, you can do that. It's also an audiobook, so wherever you would get your audiobooks, go and check that out too, and have a listen that way. I know one of the people, Mark Sylvester, who's been on doing one of the testimonials for the book. I think he definitely listened to it first as well. So yeah, it's a great listen as well as a great read. And speaking of books, I wanted to mention this one. Cynthia's been in touch to say that this is now live. You can buy it on the sorts of platforms that you would normally do, depending on your preference. But she was on as a guest on the 12th of January, which was episode 476. So if you want to find out more about Cynthia's thought process, her background, all of those things, take a listen to that Education on Fire episode first. Get an insight of who she is, how she's worked, and her professional background, and dive into that book. Go in and get that wherever you get your books. She has sent me a copy, which I haven't, literally the last day or so, which I've not read yet, but I will also be reading that through and feeding back my thoughts as we go through as well. So yeah, thank you, Cynthia, for your help and support, and great for you to be on the show doing that. So let's just stop for a moment and talk about the SEND reforms which have come out, or the white paper that's come out this week. And as I mentioned, there are many people who are much better placed to talk about what this actually means in terms of I think it's 120 pages of important information. I know some people are excited about the intention of it. There are people who are a bit apprehensive about what it actually means in practice, the amount of work, added work with schools. There are some people who think the terminology is maybe something which needs defining more so that people understand those things. And of course, funding for each children and the changes that are there. I'm not going to go into all those individual details, but I think the thing I wanted to mention is the fact that these are the words that are sort of the front of the paper as well. Every child achieving and thriving. So reforms to school and the SEND system in England to ensure that every child can achieve and thrive. Now, the reason I want to just mention this is because there are a couple of things which are important about it. One, which is incredible, is that there is money available to support this. £4 billion. Over 3 years, I think it is, but certainly over the next few years as these things start to get debated, and it's not in law just yet, but obviously there's a time frame of how these things are going to become a reality between now and about 2030. But my thought was, for all of those things which are important, and if you have a SEND child or you're going through the processes and all the systems are there, there's lots of things to think about. But so often it's that sense of why are we in this position already? Why are people not thriving? And also, what is it that every child should be achieving? Because it seems to me that it's very much about it needs to look a certain way. They're achieving based on the fact you need to have these results at the end of this particular year, whether it's SATs, whether it's before that, whether it's GCSEs, whether it's A-levels. And so that's fine if you're fitting within that particular category. If you're not, then what does that actually look like as we go through? And it took me back to this particular thing that I shared recently as well. An Albert Einstein joke and that quote, and there are various other versions of these that you may well have seen, is the fact that it works brilliantly if you're the right person for traditional schooling. As we said, the version that's sort of the Industrial Revolution version that fits in there, you able to get the knowledge, you're able to kind of work things out in a way that works in terms of taking exams, go through the system. And if you're really struggling, and back to the SEND white paper, if you need help and support, of course, that's incredibly important. But the amount of support and what you need, how does that work, and why is that important, and why are you in that position? Because is it because we're trying to make children be a certain way, and if they're not, then all these things, all this money's being spent to actually make it okay to put a square peg in a round hole, so to speak? Is this money sort of trying to get rid of those corners in order to make sure you fit into a system that's already there? Well, what if that system was different? If you had £4 billion, what would you do it in order to actually make what being in school for every child looked different? So what if it wasn't a question of being in classroom sizes the way they currently are? What if there was more where you could actually be part of the community and your learning was done outside of school? Not just as the old school visit, but actually whole projects which are actually much more cohesive and actually part of the wider environment. What about if you're not interested in actually the maths and English as the defining factor? What if you want to be able to, as we said before, the more than a school, what is it that we value? We want to see how you are as a person. Actually, if some of the things which I personally was really important to me, music, if every person was learning an instrument and had the opportunity to perform and to learn the skills that went with that, the effective, the intentionality that you need for that, the actual kind of focus, the drive, the positive well-beings of all these sorts of things, which comes from actually being in the here and now, being present, that are so much of the things that the money seems to be to help, because we're not in that environment. And we talk about screens, we've done that whole thing about technology in the previous weeks, but it's like, well, let's give children something to be in, get them outside more often, actually being able to get things in your hands, get dirty, go out into the world and actually have real conversations with people, explore things, have projects that are related to businesses in the community at large. And I wonder if actually, if there's this much money available, could we not change that? Support the children that need it, of course, but actually with a real system change, would that make that money go further? How about if that £4 billion was a match funding and they could get £4 billion from investment from businesses, from the community further afield? Then you've got twice as much money to make an even bigger change. How about starting with that? I don't know. If you've got any thoughts, if you've got any answers, put them in the comments. Let me know. I'll be fascinated to know what it is that you think as well. But it just struck me that if there's money available to do that, is there a way of actually sending it so actually maybe it's supporting children in a positive way rather than just only being a way that we're trying to make them fit? Like I said, that's idea of a square peg into a round hole. What about if all the holes were different and actually the system supported children for what they needed, not just how it's fitted within the school environment and the way a school looks now? Anyway, let me know. Please let me know in the comments. As I said, this just struck me as one of those things that, yeah, if I'm able to climb a tree, it's all going to be very easy. If I'm a fish, not so much. No matter how much money there is there, no matter how much you want me to do it in a different way, it's just not how it's going to work. But if each of these pillars of learning, whatever they happen to be, in whichever way you did it, was related to each of these, in this particular example, an animal each, then of course they could all be brilliant, they could all be measured, they could all be thriving and achieving in their own way, but it's not going to look the same for each person. And at that point, I think we start to see education looking different in a much better way. Anyway, those are my thoughts for today. Let me know in the comments if you want to do it live. If you watch the replay, please let me know what you think. We will be continuing this conversation as it were. As I said, hashtag Education on Fire is always a great place to be able to enable me to find what's going on and sharing what you're doing as well. So just as before we wrap up, just wanted to remind you that the NAPE conference this year is in with the University of Bedfordshire, and it's going to be on Friday the 8th of May. It's all about reading. The keynote, as it says there, is about reading for pleasure, but we have all areas of what reading is about and in a wider context. So like we said, from writing to poetry, RSC drama, all those things that are there. And basically the way it's going to work, we're going to have a keynote to begin with, and then we've got all of these different workshops, and you can actually then choose which one you'd like to go to. So you can choose 2 out of those, and we'll replicate them morning and afternoon. So you pick one for the morning, one for the afternoon, and then it'd be fantastic. It'd be great to see you there. Let us know everything that you need to know if you've got any questions or whatever. In terms of cost, it's only £60 per person, £50 if you're a NAPE member. So you can go to the NAPE website and find out how to join if you want to make the most of that. But the way to find this particular website, the easiest way, is educationonfire.com/reading. So yeah, thank you very much. Great to see you this week again. Great to have you here if you're watching the replay, and I'll be back with you again next Wednesday. Education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire.